A lot of people who come in to study psychology, the social psychology, really care about happiness. Happiness books sell by far the most of whenever you go to a bookshop. Happiness like has a bunch of books, and many of them become bestsellers by the millions. Many people want to be happy, and many people feel like they're not happy, like things are not going very well. And one of the main challenges that we have is how do we help ourselves to be more happy? Something that I really try to implement in my own life, and I'll tell you what is it that I do. But I also want to give you some tools about thinking of happiness. And let's suppose that you care about scientific evidence. What can you look up on science, scientific evidence, psychological science articles, in order to help you understand yourself and contribute to your own happiness? I am going to try and tie this into prosocial behavior. So the topic that we have is altruism and morality. So one of the main questions that we have in psychological science is, if I'm more prosocial, will that make me happy? Another question that we can ask is, if I'm more prosocial, are the people who are helped more happy after I help them? It seems very trivial. Why would we even need to ask these things? Of course, if somebody receives help, they will become happier. That's not necessarily the case. So we want to understand the different factors. But I think most of all, one of the things that leads to issues, and this is a good slogan for this course and generally in life, is that it really seems like the key to happiness is what? What's the number one key to happiness? Very good. Money, like that. What else? What other factor? Less workload. Relationships. Very good. Money, relationships, two very important key factors in our life. In a perspective of psychology and judgment decision making, it seems like happiness is really dependent on having low expectations. If you have low expectations, if you exceed expectations, you're happy. So there's a lot about reference points. If we expect a lot, we really came into advanced social psychology thinking there's not going to be any work, and kind of chill. And then it seems like we need to put a little bit of work into it. Or we expected to have a multiple choice exam, and now we have to do all this work by ourselves. Misaligned expectations lead to a lot of misery and unhappiness. But it also leads to a lot of things regarding the goals that we put for ourselves on how to do better. So by far, we are the most privileged of any people who have ever existed on the planet. And it doesn't seem like the more we do better, the more money that we have, the more relationships, the more connected we are on social media, the more happy we are. It seems like we adjust very, very fast. So whatever the environment, whatever happens to us, we just adjust to it. And that becomes the new normal, the new default. And the new default gives us even more pressure in order to feel, live up to these expectations of everybody around me seems to be happy, seems to be wealthy, seems to be having good relationships. Why don't I have this? I'm unhappy, right? So combining issues of money, definitely you need a certain amount of money in order to feel happy. If you're living in poverty and you're collecting garbage all day, then perhaps this is going to affect your happiness. Relationships really matter, but it's also the amount of and how much and to what extent and what is it I expect from myself and from others. So I'm going to ask you to rate some happiness. So we're going to do this a little bit on Mentimeter. So you've got your QR code. I just want to know generally in your life, how are you doing? Just so we can contemplate a little bit about happiness. So while you're answering this, also try and set some expectations. What do you think others are going to say? Are they going to indicate that they're happy or not happy? So I'll start with hiding things. And you can already see that there's a comparison over here. So reference points could be how much you expect from yourself or from this course, but it can also be a comparison to others. So you can see here, happiness generally in life. Happiness right now, in this moment, in this classroom. So already there's a differentiation between generally in life, I might be happy, but now I'm in advanced social psychology, so I'm less happy, right? There's something that's general, and there's something that's specific. Happiness 10 years from now, so we can also make predictions about what's going to happen. So perhaps if we're very pessimistic, then in the future, it's going to be less happy. If we're optimistic, then happiness might increase. And then comparing you to the average HQ student. So what do you think the average HQ student is experiencing? Are you higher? Are you lower? Okay, good. So I can see you working on this. Yeah. So interesting. It seems like we had a hypothesis that we're going to be somewhere negative, but it seems like overall, maybe right now, it's a boring class that we don't want to be in. But generally in life, it does seem like people are quite happy. I would even say that this is happier than I usually see from my classes, and not compared to the average HQ student, it's not significant. So don't overthink this. But basically, like a little bit higher or the same as average HQ student. Oh, good. So we can do all kinds of comparisons. We can compare ourselves to right now to 10 years from now. So you can see like 11 versus 51. So it seems like we're very optimistic. Seems like, and this I think would be significant when we run this in a statistical test. So the differences between 11 and 51, many of us expect to be happier, which is not exactly the expected trend, given everything that's happening in the world and all the challenges that are that we're facing. So this is already something very informative for us to learn a little bit about our class. Here we have some responses about how you would spend 50 Hong Kong dollars to make yourself the happiest. You can give some more responses if you want. It seems like now is a good time to buy Bitcoin. I don't really. Food, bubble tea, nicer drink. I would say this is very consistent with previous classes. Food seems to be a major component of students' happiness, which is interesting. 50 Hong Kong dollars is not a lot, but we typically think about, okay, 50, what can I do? Food is you can do something with 50 Hong Kong dollars in terms of food. But there are some other things, like donations, which is interesting because this is not something that you spend on yourself, it's something that you spend on somebody else. So one of the things that we do is that we collect this with large samples, and then we try to codify this to see what kind of categories we have. So one of the things that we can code is whether we spend this on ourselves or we spend this on others, right? And we can code other things. So for example, what is the domain? The domain food, this is something else, maybe a movie on Tuesday, I don't know, 55 Hong Kong dollars. Maybe something else that we can do, take a taxi to the peak, I don't know, whatever. Buying a present for my partner. So great, I like it that we have both. Sorry. Somebody want to say something? Okay, what else do we do? When you think about the last 50 Hong Kong dollars that you spent, what did you spend it on? Also, there's the component of food. Great, applying for the transcript. Okay. Yeah, so interesting about the misalignments between what is it that we think we should do with 50 Hong Kong dollars and whether we actually do this or not. There seems like there's consistency between thinking about food and actually buying food. And this is an interesting question that usually comes up. So let's say that you have 100 million Hong Kong dollars and you want to become happy. In most places in the world, this would be a lot of money, but in Hong Kong, we have real estate, so that's a problem. So many people say things like, oh, here we have buy a house, invest in stock and give some to my parents. So parents seem to be like a repeating theme in Hong Kong, which I don't really see in other places in the world. And definitely the thing with housing. In most other places in the world, you don't need that much money and couples can actually do quite well. And even single people can afford to buy their own houses. But in Hong Kong, it's such a challenge. The first thing that people think about when it comes to 100 million Hong Kong dollars is let's buy a house. You can think about all kinds of things of what you want to do with this. Sometimes, very rarely, 1 out of 10 say, maybe I want to donate some of this. Maybe I want to invest this in something that would build a future for others. All kinds of things. But I like these discussions about what makes us happier. And I feel like we should be doing a lot more of those. So today I want to discuss with you some of the things that we have psychological science evidence about what increases happiness. And I want us to have an open discussion about what those things are. This is an interesting paper. We've already discussed some of these scholars. And I really like this because I feel like this is one that really requires cultural adaptation. So here we have mistakenly seeking solitude. So we talked about relationships. What they did over here is they asked people that commute on the bus, on the train. So I don't know how many of you take the bus or the MTR and how you get to school, but I spend a lot of time commuting all the time. I take flights. I mean, the flights I usually sit very close to people, sometimes too close to people, are in my space, and we all stay quiet. We never talk to one another. So these scholars from the US with a very American kind of cultural mindset said, we feel like perhaps talking to strangers is going to increase our happiness. And they wanted to run some experiments on this. So they ran a randomized control trial. This is in 2008, and they did this both on the trains, commuting, I think it was on the way to Chicago from various places, and on buses. And randomly, they assigned people to ask them either to sit by themselves and not engage with anybody else, or create some kind of an interaction, a conversation with the person who is randomly sitting next to them, the bus or the train. And what they've shown is that they've had prediction and then they had actual. So in each one of those, you can see on the left side there's actual, on the right side there's predicted. And the main point of this is that people usually are very bad at predicting how much they're going to enjoy talking to others. But here it seems like a lot of people predicted having bad consequences, feeling that they'll do a lot better in terms of happiness and in terms of productivity. They have both of those. This is productivity and this is positivity. In terms of happiness and productivity, they expected to do a lot better if they just sit there by themselves. But it turns out, and this is what this paper was trying to argue, that actually it was exactly the opposite. So the people who talked to others felt both more happy and more productive afterwards. So many TED Talks and books about this. And one of the questions that you want to ask is, how good is the evidence here? Would this work in any other place in the world? So whenever we see this kind of article, we want to ask ourselves meaningful questions about whether this works or doesn't work. We can also do all kinds of things like implement this on ourselves. So we're going to do something similar in the classroom. I won't tell you exactly what it is that we're going to do. Hold off with this for a second. I want to talk about a second thing, and this is the issue of gratitude. So we have it pretty good, but I feel like most of the time we fail ourselves and we feel like we don't have enough. Many times we have very good things in our life, both money and relationships, but we don't appreciate them very much. We take them for granted. We don't know how good is it that we have in this life. Especially, I feel like it comes to people. We don't appreciate the people in our lives very much. The things that we take for granted, of having family, of having good friends, of having classmates, of having environment. So I want us to try and do something as an exercise today. It's going to be the first half of the class, whatever is left of it, in order for us to think a little bit about gratitude. So a lot of evidence out there regarding gratitude. I really like listening to this podcast because this is one of the very few podcasts that checks evidence, and they do this in a very, very good way. So I already talked about one podcast by Stuart Ritchie called Studies Show, and then they break down everything about the scientific evidence, like Science Versus. They actually go and they check the citations and they give you everything in the transcript. So I was really curious during the COVID pandemic when they came out with this. I was really worried about myself. I was worried about my family. I was worried about you students. What's happening with our happiness? Are we going to survive this pandemic? How to help ourselves do better? So they tackled all kinds of trends. If you open your TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever it is that you're using, then you might get a very wrong idea about what works and what doesn't work. So for example, a trend about 2 years ago was about cold plunges, cold bath. So if you just take a cold bath, this is going to increase your happiness. Does this work or not work? Actually, they took a bunch of these things. They had different chapters in this podcast. So I listened to all of them. And they even try these things on themselves. So you can hear the host go and take a cold plunge in an ice bath in order to see how she feels about this. Beyond the interesting anecdote of this host being very funny and how she reacts to all of this, I was really interested in chapter 5 and chapter 6 that has to do with gratitude. Because I don't feel like we discuss these things enough, gratitude, something that's very meaningful. So I looked it up, and some of these researchers actually know quite well. Some of these researchers, we replicated their work, so I know that their work is generally tends to be very solid and reliable. And I want to introduce you to one of these researchers, and his name is Tom Gilad. And what's nice about this is that about the same week as Science Versus came out, there's another podcast, much less scientific, unfortunately. It's a lot more about narrative and stories. So this podcast called Hidden Brain interviews a lot of high reputation scholars like Tom Gilad in order to try and understand their research. So I'm going to play to you just the beginning of the podcast, so you understand it's a very soothing kind of voice that the person who does this podcast has, and how he introduces the issue of gratitude. I hope it will work. All right.
This is Hidden Brain. I'm Shankar Vedantam. If you make at least $30,000 a year, congratulations. Your income is 10 times the global median and in the top 5% of incomes worldwide. If you are older than 35, congratulations. For much of human history, many people died before they were 30. If you have a job and stable income, live in a democratic country, and have a college degree, you are in a rarefied group in the history of humankind. If you enjoy good health, good friends, nice vacations, you really ought to get down on your knees and thank Providence. So, are you on your knees yet? Why is it, even when our lives are objectively better than the lives of most people who ever lived, we are all prone to seeing the clouds, not the silver lining? This is true not just when it comes to global and historical statistics, but in our daily lives. We notice small delays at the airport, but ignore the miracle that we can literally fly across the world. We take our health for granted and only notice the gifts of our limbs and our senses when they are taken away from us. We zero in on annoyances in personal relationships and rarely pause to acknowledge what is wonderful about our friends, families, and coworkers. Our ungratitude for our good fortune is so automatic and ubiquitous that it seems obvious there must be an underlying psychology to it. That's the topic of today's show, the enemies of gratitude and how to fight them. This week on Hidden Brain.
So if you want, very welcome to listen to the rest of the episode. There's like 15 minutes of this, but I want to introduce you to the person who I interviewed and the way that he talks about things. And you can also see him in a video.
Why is gratitude so important?
A bunch of answers to that. The way I like to summarize it is we people often use this phrase of, I try to always be my best self, and sometimes I fall short of, I wasn't my best self today. And there's a lot of research showing that whatever that best self is for you, you're better able to achieve it when you're grateful. And it's really hard for you to achieve it if you're the opposite of grateful. If you feel entitled, if you feel resentful, you're not your best self during those times. Now, why do I say this? A fair amount of it comes from research that David DeSteno at Northeastern has done, that, he creates these clever studies, kind of like the studies with clever manipulations that your dad did back in the heyday of dissonance theory, how to make people feel this psychological tension. In this case, he has people work on something for a really long time, and their computer on a computer, and the computer freezes up and all the work seems like it's going to be for naught. But someone comes in, let me see if I can help you here, and restores. And so you've got a grateful bone in your body. You're going to be really grateful to this person. And then you're given an opportunity to, in one of these economic games, you have to figure out how much money to keep for myself, how much to give away, either to that person, and not surprisingly, you're more generous to that person. But even if it's someone else, a third party, you're more generous to the world when this grateful thing had happened. He also shows that people are more...
I'll just say on this, there's a difference between feeling grateful. So just the feeling of gratefulness leads you to be more prosocial and donate more and experience more positive feelings. But there's also the expression of gratitude. So expressing gratitude and saying thank you and telling others that you're grateful for whatever it is that's happening in your life, telling yourself that you're grateful also increases happiness.
Willing or better able to delay gratification. They will choose options that will allow them to get more later than less right now. The appeal of now is diminished. And so much of, achieving, doing well in the world is delaying gratification, putting things off for bigger rewards in the future. And turns out you can do that more readily if you're full of gratitude.
Being full of gratitude and knowing how to express gratitude seems to be associated with many things in life, like self-control, delayed gratification, being able to feel more with others and to be more prosocial and more embedded in your environment. So there's lots of different takeaways for what it means to be grateful. But I want us to do a little bit of an exercise in order to try and understand this. So this is our exercise, and this is what I want you to do. I'm going to give you a few minutes in order to write this down. We're going to try and do a little bit of gratitude ourselves, okay? And I want you to first try this exercise. Try to give this your best shot. I know it's not exactly what you were expecting to do in this class, but since you've listened to Tom Gilovich and you've heard Hidden Brain, and we have a lot of psychological science evidence on this, try it out. What do you have to lose? But I want you to also listen to yourself and think about what's happening to you when you're doing this. Okay, so I'm going to give you some time. This is the task that you have. I want you to think about one person in your life who you are most grateful for. You can be grateful for food and bubble tea and, reading a good book on Reading Week. But I want you to focus on people, because I feel like people, like we said before, relationships with people are the most important in our life. And often we don't tell these people just how much they mean to us. So I want you to think of one person you're very grateful for, but you've never told this person before, right? So this person does not know, you've never expressed this to them in person. Could be anyone, at any point in time in your life. Somebody who has affected your life, is very meaningful in your life, you're grateful for this person. So have one person in your mind. Write two things about this person. So first write who this person is, and then write two things that you're grateful for about this person. And the last part is hypothetical, but I want you to try and frame this as a text message, something like a WhatsApp or an email, very, very short, less than one paragraph, no? Where you express to this person the two things that you're very grateful for. And I want you first to go through this task and then feel inside, listen to yourself. What is it that you're experiencing? If you experience nothing, completely okay. If you experience anger and sadness, that's also okay. If you experience happiness, that's also okay. But I want us to have a kind of a discussion on it. There is a follow-up, so this is the first stage. Take 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, let's do 3 minutes for you to do these 3 stages. First the person, then 2 things about them, and then 1 paragraph, okay? Hopefully by now you have at least a person in mind and 2 things you're grateful for, and the beginning of kind of like a letter that you wrote to them. We like to separate and sit with our group of friends in this classroom. Now we have this block and this block. And typically almost every classroom we sit exactly with our friends. And I feel like the most important thing that you can get from your undergraduate is definitely not my course. It's not also learning about learning, and it's not the materials, it's the people that you're going to meet. And I feel like it's my obligation, and I don't do this enough, to give you as many opportunities as possible to meet other people in the classroom. So I'm going to try and do this together with you today. I'm going to couple you up with somebody that hopefully you don't know, that you've never met before in this course. But it's a little bit awkward because at the beginning when we meet somebody, unless you sit together with them in a plane and you're both going to a destination, you don't have anything to talk about. So I'm giving you something to talk about. I'm giving you this thing that you just wrote as a gratitude. So I want you to share this with the other person, with the stranger, with this other person in the classroom. I want you to share what you wrote, who this person is, what are these things, and I want you to listen to what the other person is saying. So the first part of the gratitude exercise is you by yourself, what did you experience? But as you're sharing this with another person, I also want you to try and listen to yourself. What do you feel when you share this with another person? What do you feel when this person shares this together back to you? Okay? So we have 22 in this classroom, and I'm going to couple you with somebody else. I'm going to give you numbers. Please listen to your numbers and also notice the numbers that I'm giving to others around you. So I'm going to give you numbers between 1 and 11. And if you both have the number 1, then you're going to be you're going to be together. Both of you have number 2, you're going to be together. Okay? I know it's not for everybody. Sometimes feel a little bit awkward, but try it out. Okay? All right. So numbers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay? 1. Maybe notice first. 1. Okay? 2, 3. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay? So I'm just going to go through this again. Who's number 1? Raise your hand. Number 2, raise your hand. Number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9, number 10, number 11. How many of you have been assigned to somebody who you don't know? Raise your hand. Wow, success. Very, very good. Okay. So I want you to find this other person, sit together, find a corner. You can use the entire classroom. 5 minutes, I want you to talk about this gratitude thing, okay? So 2.5 minutes and 2.5 minutes. 2.5, one person shares, 2.5 minutes, the other person shares, okay? Then for the rest of the 5 minutes, you can talk about whatever it is that you want. If you don't want to talk anymore and you want to take a break, that's also okay. No problem. But I encourage you to take this opportunity to take an interest in the other person, okay? 2.5 minutes, 2.5 minutes, and then 5 minutes, whatever you want, okay? Okay. Find your other person, find a place, and start doing it. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's been 10 minutes. This was very enjoyable for me, just watching you. I don't think I've seen all of you smiling and laughing and conversing and hearing your voices. Wow, makes me feel a lot more positive. So I feel like I get to know a different side of you. All these faces looking at me all the time, so serious. And now I see you in your interactions with others. So that's amazing. I hope you were able to experience something new and also listen to yourselves a little bit. I'm going to give you a 5-minute break so you can go refresh yourself, come back, sit back to your rows, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, 5 minutes, go refresh yourself, come back. I'm curious if there's something that you want to share with me about your interaction. So we experienced 2 different things in one class exercise. Amazing. We combined both talking to a stranger and expressing gratitude for somebody to a complete stranger. So what are some of your thoughts? What kind of things do you want to share with me? Yes, please. Very good. Yeah. And it seems like, and we have some evidence for this, but definitely from my personal experience, maybe you can tell me about yours, that the more personal the thing that we share, it seems like the more personal stuff we'll get back, the more meaningful it is, right? So when you share something this personal, like somebody you're grateful for, something from your own background that you haven't told that person, then it already overcomes some kind of a barrier. Going from surface, oh, the weather is so nice, Hong Kong, Hong Kong studies this, but when you go something deeper about relationships and you share something that's personal to you, then it also elicits something back from that person, and it overcomes going from the surface into much deeper level. Have you felt that? Yeah. So sometimes when you see a stranger and you don't have a good excuse, just going into, oh, you know who I'm grateful for? Let me tell you about my teacher, or about my family, or about my... It's a little bit awkward, but when you have a good excuse for this, because this is a class exercise, then you're able to very quickly go into this. There's another exercise that we might do some other time regarding what are the best questions to ask somebody when you go on a date in order to increase the chances of you getting into a meaningful relationship with them afterwards. So a lot of people in social psychology are really interested in it. So what helps people create a special bond that goes beyond the annoying and the surface level. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to the final stage. And this is an interesting stage that I invite you to do, but is optional. I'm not going to force you into anything awkward. Although I know some other instructors who make this mandatory, but not here. The last section is optional. But I actually invite you to take what it is that you wrote and actually send it to that person. So in many of these experiments that we run, we get somebody to just come in and write something meaningful like this, telling somebody who they've never told before, hypothetically, something that they would write them. And then when they finish this, they say, now here's the phone, please call that person and just read this out loud. And oh my God, kind of things that happen. So in order to help you do this, I can offer you my services. You can tell the other person, my professor forced me to do this. We had this very strange class exercise. I had to write this. Use me as an excuse. Tell me afterwards, if you want, what happened. Okay? An invitation. In order to hopefully encourage you a little bit, I'm going to show you that people did this. This became kind of like a meme, went viral on YouTube after a TV show did this. I'm going to show you very short clips of what happens. So this is the guy who ran this original video. And then after they did the original video, a lot of people sent in recording.
We thought it might be fun to test out for ourselves. We gathered a selection of volunteers to act as our subjects. First, we gave them a test. They didn't know what we were looking for, but it gave us a pretty good idea of their current level of happiness. We asked them to close their eyes and think of somebody who was really influential in their life, somebody who did something really amazing or important for them. We had them write down as much as they could about why this person was so important. Now, a lot of them thought at this point the experiment was over, until we really put them on the spot and tried to get them to call that person and read what they wrote about them. Thank you, Jessica. We're going to have you call your mother. So who was that right person for you?
I'm going to skip this. This is where they call them. I'm going to go into the section where you actually see the kind of reactions at the end.
She's my #1 fan and my #1 supporter. She makes me happy because despite all my mistakes and my decisions, she still loves me no matter what.
Your friendship is everything. And you are one of the most important person in my life.
Even when she has a kid and many children, I will love her more than her kids. Okay, maybe not. I will never forget when she flew 3,000 miles at the drop of a phone call to save me from a breakup.
I'm being blessed by having a son like you. I love you.
Bye.
Why did you do that to me?
I don't know, because they made me do it.
Thank you for picking up. Bye, sweetie.
And then they're like, here, you're gonna write this letter. And then I wrote like this whole long ass letter, which, I like don't write. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, guess what? Now we're gonna call her and you're gonna read her this letter. And I was like, what the
So already watching this makes me emotional. Seeing this kind of emotional during the day went through, and you just had a snippet. The whole episode is quite amazing in what comes out of people and how people react to this. I think we really underestimate the kind of impact that this has on the people who receive this news. So they invited the people who watch the show to do something similar and send this to them. And this came back with a lot of different responses. I'll just show you one of those.
Over and out. Oh my gosh, that is the best tribute that anyone could ever give anyone. And you just made my day, and you made my 91 years worth the living.
Hello.
I'm here.
Oh.
So thank you, Grandpa, for being my grandpa and loving me. I love you.
Oh my goodness. What a wonderful thing he said there.
Thank
Well,
you.
I got tears in my eyes, buddy.
I do too.
I love you.
You too. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, they're really feel good kind of videos to watch. For me, always it gets an emotional reaction out of me. And we also have, of course, academic evidence for this. For some of the studies that actually did this, the surprise of reaching out, it's appreciated more than we think. So sometimes we think, what kind of an impact is this going to have? So if you do this well, if you have some kind of an excuse and you don't shock them into thinking that something wrong is wrong with you, then actually it has a very good reaction. And the interesting thing is that it has good reactions for strong types, but it also has good reactions for weak types. So even if you're not that close to the person, just overwhelmingly positive, and people really underestimate the kind of positive response that they'll get from this. So it's an invitation. I encourage you to try and do this. And if you don't mind sharing, I'll be happy to hear from you afterwards what happened. I just want to say over here, a recent replication by a group who are not academics who decided to try and replicate all of the recent findings in the top journals. And here you can see successful replication in terms of transparency, replicability, and clarity. This is one of the most comprehensive, positive replications, successful replications of a finding. So this seems to be doing really, really well, replicable and well done. All right, in the remaining time, I want to discuss with you the science of happiness. It seems like happiness is a big thing. So aside from gratitude and aside from talking to strangers, there's so many things that can affect your happiness. And the question is, which ones of those work best? And it seems like students really care about this because the most popular course ever in psychology is about happiness, and it's by this person, Laurie Santos. I'll show a little bit of the video that she has from that course, introducing this course, and I'm going to discuss what I think is the most credible evidence of that. If you want to take the course, it's available to you. Now Yale opened this up for everybody, so it's not just for Yale students. It's available here. You can take the course or even download their app in order to follow on some of the advice that they give.
We all have these intuitions about the kinds of things that will really make us happy. We think it's more money, material possessions. My students think it's, perfect grades. The sad thing is that the research shows that a lot of those intuitions are just dead wrong. As a professor, I started to see on campus the mental health crisis that we hear so much about in the news, but I was really seeing it in the trenches. Students who were too depressed to function or having panic attacks because they were waiting for their grades or worried about their internships. I just realized that students needed some help to navigate the kind of mental health challenges that they were facing, and I thought the science of psychology really could provide them with some help. I've heard from mothers who've given this class to teens who are really struggling, who are feeling suicidal, and they feel like the tips that they've learned together as a family has really kind of improved things and really helped people who are in really pretty serious mental health crisis. One of my favorite responses that we received was from an elderly learner who wrote and said, I'm in my 80s, this is the first online class I've taken. Even in my 80s, these tips have been helping me. They're reminding me to spend more time with my grandkids and to spend more time being social. One of the most common critiques I get when I tell people I teach a class on the science of happiness is, wait, really? That's a science? When we think of happiness, we often think of something that's kind of ephemeral or even hokey or kind of, granola, hippy-dippy stuff. But what separates the platitudes from the scientific version of seeking happiness is the science part. Research shows the kinds of things we really can be doing.
This is the things that she offers. Talking to a stranger, meditate, reduce the number of choices, focus less on end goal, call a friend, keep a gratitude journal, and sleep. I just want to cover the evidence the way that I see it. So we're not going to go into this in detail, but you can take the Yale course or see what the students from the previous semester did on this. This is my summary of the whole thing. When it comes to talking to strangers, even though we've experienced this in the class, and I feel like many of you perhaps have had positive experiences with it. I've had positive experience with this on the plane ride back to Hong Kong. But generally, I feel like in terms of scientific evidence, this is definitely overhyped. The effects are weaker than expected, and they're very contextual. So it really depends on the mindset and the person and the interaction, who the other person is. And especially today, especially for certain situations, if you're, let's say, female, for example, and you're approached by a male, there's lots of complexities, and things in the world today are different than they were back in 2008. You can try this out as an experiment. If you want to run a replication with me, I'm happy to, but I would generally say, be careful with this evidence. Don't run and talk to every stranger that you see. When it comes to meditation, we have some faculty at HKU in the psychology department that really believe in this. We even have a program that goes to every school in Hong Kong and tries to get kids to meditate. The evidence over there is very, very confusing. It goes in all kinds of different directions. And I would generally say it works for some people. And even then, it's very difficult to distinguish this from placebo. And then it doesn't work for many others. So depending on this, if it works for you, you try to keep going with this, great. If not, I wouldn't put all of my resources into this. Reduce choices, also tricky, very messy. We won't go into this. Call a friend. There is emerging evidence that whenever you're feeling down, reaching out to your loved ones, reaching out to the people that you care about really helps with this. So social connections and relationships is one of the things that was raised at the beginning of the class. Is really difficult to argue against. And we have more and more scientific evidence on this. Gratitude, also emerging evidence. We need a little bit more, but it seems like it's in the right direction. But the number one, by far, the best thing for your happiness, and it needs to also be in the right amount, is sleep. So there's clear evidence it's strong. It's also a medical health kind of evidence rather than psychological. So I tried to summarize this for you. When it comes to money, you can watch some of the sessions that I've had on the relationship between money and happiness from Judgment Decision Making last year. I think one or two of you even attended that class. Money, it's complicated, but I would generally say that if you spend money the right way, just having money is not good enough. But if you spend money to buy time, or if you spend money not just on yourself, but also spend money on others, it doesn't need to be a donation to effective charities. It could be just like spending money with other people that you care about, meaningful. So just having more money doesn't make you happy, but the way that you spend it, what you spend it on, seems to matter. So this is kind of like the summary of what I have. Last thing I want to mention to you is this thing about spending money on others. And the reason why I want to share this with you is because I want to show you how TED Talks can go wrong sometimes. So first I'll show you very, very briefly Elizabeth Dunn talking about spending money on others as promoting happiness. And then I'll summarize what's wrong with this.
People don't spend their money right. So, armed with my newfound wealth and a team of graduate students, I wanted to figure out how people could use their money better. In particular, I wondered whether people might actually get more happiness from spending their money on others rather than on themselves. Now, to test this, I had to make a little money fall from the sky. So we went out on campus and just handed people either a $5 or a $20 bill randomly in the morning, and we asked them to spend this money by 5 p.m. that day. Now, we told some people, hey, we want you to spend this money on yourself. We told others, we want you to spend this money on someone else.
And the TED Talk is actually based on a science paper. And in the science paper, you can see the conclusion from this science paper is that spending money on others promotes happiness. And whenever we publish something in a journal like Science, then a lot of people listen to this. It's very rare in social psychology. But I can tell you that when I heard about this study and when I listened to this TED Talk, then I went to read the article. And the articles in Science are very, very short, then 2-3 pages. But already I noticed something that is not clear. And I just want you to focus on this for a second. So this is a note. Spending money on others promote happiness. We recently identified a bug in the statistical package SPSS 14, What is this about? That we used to analyze the data. The bug causes the first line of the data to overwrite the 6th line of the data. This bug affected the data for the study, n equals 16, primarily because of this error, decreased the variance in our data set. Correcting this led to a completely different p-value. A science paper with an error, not a small error, a big error, not a small error that affects only this paper, but it's an error in SPSS 14 that affects many other articles. So even when you go and you read this, you need to be very, very careful. What does a science paper say? Just the fact that it was published in Science doesn't mean that this is credible. So what do we need? We need a lot more than this. So we need replications. And this is why I argue again and again that you need to check the latest, most up-to-date information about everything that is in those TED Talks. Okay? So here, for example, they ran this 3 different times. They ran this as a registered report, which means that this is a pre-registration that's sent to peer reviewers, and then they get responses, reviews on their pre-registration plan. So they ran this again and again. One time, it worked, but with a much smaller effect. But the 2 other times, it didn't work. So it seems like the evidence here is like 1 out of 3 in the high-power, well-done registrations. So I would say, at the very best, this is preliminary evidence. This is not the evidence that we thought we had on this. So we need to be very, very careful. Even though we had a TED Talk, even though we had a science paper, we need to take this into consideration and understand that at best, this is mixed. And then we need more evidence to see when does this happen or not. Here you can see that this was done on 7,012, 1,950, and here is like 5,200. And the evidence from the larger sample is actually very, very weak. Why am I showing you this? Because this is very, very important for your project number 1. Careful, because I'm going to show you the Bangkok report, and they got an A+ last year. So if we just open the Bangkok report, they did very, very well in the way that they wrote their introduction, in the way that they showed everything. But if you go over their report, and this is the one that we recommended to you, and you look at the way that I responded to this, the students did a few things wrong, which I don't want you to fall into this trap. So for example, they didn't read the article. At best, they read somebody citing this article, or they only listened to ChatGPT. So even just reading the abstract would have led them to understand that actually what they're arguing is false. So the findings of these 2 studies are consistent with a science paper, finding positive effects of prosocial spending on happiness. Like I just showed you, only 1 out of the 3 did this, and 2 out of the 3 found that this is not actually correct. So you can see my comment on this, that they haven't really read the paper. So I actually explain what this means. So just reading the abstract would have allowed them to catch up on this. In addition to that, and then I write these effects are not just small, they're tiny, and so forth. Also here, sometimes they cited that something found significant effects when actually, in fact, they didn't. And I think the reason why they had this is because another article had a mistake in the citation. So I need to read the article. Even the abstract shows that this is inaccurate. So they wrote, found a statistically significant effect, and they wrote in the abstract, we did not observe a statistical difference. So please be very, very careful when you cite something, and make sure that you read this in depth. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to show you, that they wrote, done, and this is the same science paper, is a research of high authority, as it was published in Science, a globally recognized and reputable academic journal known for this worldwide authorship, is renowned reputation in reflected insight score. Doesn't really matter because they just showed you a little bug in there. So just the fact that this was published in some high reputation journal, it was in a TED Talk, means nothing for this class. When I invite you to check evidence, I really want you to read the article and see, is this high quality? Are there replications? Is this a register report? Does it have open science? And so forth. So we have a few tutorials that we explain all these different factors. So for example, some of the resources that you have are these. So you can see this in the slides. All of these are also in the syllabus. So I'll just open one of those. Factors that impact credibility of scientific evidence. And this is stuff of all the different factors that relate to quality of scientific evidence. So none of this was published in Science. None of this has a TED Talk. For you to establish credibility of scientific evidence, you actually have to read the evidence and follow up and see whether this meets the highest rigor and the best practices of open science that we have. Okay? So this is just a teaser of a lot of things regarding happiness. Last semester, the students covered a lot of the TED Talks and findings regarding happiness. I showed you Bangkok, an example of somebody who made a mistake in the report but still got an A+. Completely okay for you to make mistakes. I just invite you to do better than what the other students did. So if you want to know more about happiness, you can cover some of the work that was done last semester. You can read up on the rest of the slide. And we're going to keep coming back to this issue of happiness and prosocial behavior in the upcoming classes. Hopefully, we'll also do a little bit more of interventions on ourselves to see what can increase our happiness and well-being. Okay? Thank you so much for participating in the class activities, and hope for more in the future. See you next week.